This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's Economy, Culture and Skills Committee. Thank you for joining us as we discuss the very important topic of London's broadband connectivity. In today's meeting, we'll evaluate the issue of poor broadband connectivity in London, identify its causes and those affected, assess its impact on households and businesses, and explore potential actions that could be taken to ensure that everyone has access to reliable broadband internet. Before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone to please switch their electronic devices to silent mode, and I ask members and guests to position their devices away from the microphones. If you need to adjust your microphones, please lift it from the base rather than from the actual neck itself. Members of the public are encouraged to follow the committee meeting follow us on @London Assembly on X and use the hashtag Assembly Economy for this meeting. I have a few items of business to cover. Can I ask our committee officer, Sal Fazal, to confirm any apologies for today's meeting?
Thank you, Chair. No apologies have been received. Thank you,
Sal. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interest to declare? Can I ask the committee to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on 10th of February 2025 to be signed by me as a correct record? Can I ask the committee to note the completed and ongoing actions arising from the previous meetings? Can I ask the committee to note the recent action taken by me as chair under delegated authority following consultation with party group lead members, namely to agree the London's nighttime economy report as attached Appendix 1 of the agenda report. Okay, we now, before we move on to our main business, I'm just aware that I'm getting some feedback on my mic. Is that just, are we getting this perhaps slight echo? Sorry, bear with us, panel. It's there's always something. Can we try and get that? So, thank you. Okay, we now move on to our main item of business, a discussion with our invited guests on the committee's investigation into London's broadband connectivity. I'd like to now welcome our first panel of guests, Graham Oxby, who is the Chief Executive of Community Fibre, Stacey McCady, the Digital Connectivity Lead for South London Partnership, and Trevor Dorlin, the Director of Digital Greenwich in the Royal Borough of Greenwich. And Trevor, I know that you stepped in at very short notice, so thank you very much. Thank you all for joining us. First question to all of you. So if you, when you answer, if you could just get maybe 10 seconds just explaining your role and what it is that your organisation does so that we have a context, and then move on to the answer. And if anyone has already covered what you're going to say, please just say it's been covered and move on. And also to our committee members, if a question that you are going to ask has already been asked, please just let it go. So question to you all. How well is London currently connected to high-speed, reliable broadband? And Graham, if I could start with you.
Certainly. So Community Fibre built a network of 1.3 million homes in London, sort of ready for service. That's our context. So look, I think London is reasonably well covered through a combination of existing providers like Openreach and Virgin Media, and alternative providers like ourselves and two other companies. But there are still quite significant gaps in that coverage around London. Those gaps tend to exist in two predominant areas, I would say. Some of the multi-dwelling units, the big landlords, and areas that are not so easily accessed in terms of the build of a fibre network to those properties, which typically are properties that are away from what's called the Openreach infrastructure, where there is which we're able to use on a regulated basis, but which require quite a lot of civils, digging, that sort of fairly invasive work. And those areas are the ones that typically don't have very good connectivity at the moment.
Thank you. Stacey.
So I cover South London Partnership. To date, there is 71.6% full fibre coverage across London. Of that 71.6, 48% of that is within central London. The other sub-regions get a lot less of the investment of the full fibre penetration. So South London only has an investment of 11% to date of full fibre. So we have a lot of gaps. We have a lot of areas of economic development, public realm regeneration, social housing that hasn't been able to access full fibre.
Okay, thank you. Stacey, I wonder if you could just bring the microphone a little bit closer to you. Thank you.
Is that better?
Thank you. Trevor.
Good morning. Trevor Dorling, Director of Digital Greenwich, as you've heard, part of the Royal Borough of Greenwich, and I also manage the Council's innovation company, which is DG Cities. And we've had a focus for some time on the kind of digital connectivity, digital infrastructure in the borough, which we consider to be patchy. It's a lot better than it was, but I think as we get closer to our sort of goal of ubiquitous connectivity, where the things are slowing down rather than speeding up. And I think when Graham talks about significant gaps, I mean, I think that understates the problem that we face in London as the capital city. One of the largest city in Europe, one of the major economies of any city in Europe. The significant gaps is just not good enough. So I think, in a sense, it's really good timing that the committee is choosing to look at connectivity in London, and we really need to be focused on how we improve the situation, not sort of pat ourselves on the back for the progress that has been made, which has been considerable over the last few years. But actually, I think there's grounds to be less optimistic at this moment in time than there were a couple of years ago.
Thank you. I'm going to ask all of you the next question as well, and it is about the connectivity across London. So what are all the main reasons that certain parts of London, and particularly in South and East London, where we still have pockets with comparatively poor connectivity? And Stacey, I wonder if we could start with you.
I think there's just not been enough competition coming to South London and East London. Central London obviously has the major businesses, it has a more dense population, tourists go there, so there's been a lot of investment with a lot of different operators. The further you come out, the less competition there is, the less investment there's been. I think it's just been a case of, like Trevor said, over the past couple of years, there's been a lot of market consolidation. Investors haven't been as quick to put money down to build fibre networks and complete fibre networks, so a lot are reneging on their commitments. And I think mainly the case is if we don't have enough of the funding, because we don't get to access a lot of funding that other cities do throughout the UK. So a lot of it's been focused on rural and out with London, so we don't get to access that, so we haven't had as many grants in.
Thank you. Trevor?
The whole thing is quite nuanced, I think, and in a way that's what makes it difficult. I think on the one hand, successive governments haven't recognised the challenges in metropolitan areas. Certainly in London, but not just London, in major cities across the UK. So there's been a bias towards rural communities, and in a sense, I think we know where that pressure kind of has come from, which is sort of kind of really an anxiety about contravening UK subsidy rules, and that the market would provide in metropolitan areas, and subsidy wasn't needed. So on the one hand, the successive governments haven't kind of supported metropolitan areas, and on the other, in industry, there's been a lot of cherry picking, and I think if you put a pin in the centre of London, then the connectivity and the challenge of connectivity is greater the further you move away from that pin, and I think it genuinely is, I think, quite complex to describe. I think kind of London was slow off the blocks 5 years ago, but definitely has made up in terms of the amount of fibre that there is in the ground. There's not enough, particularly in my part of the world, South East and East London. But if you compare it with a few years ago, it's immeasurably better. And the altnets, such as Community Fibre, have been very active. It's been driven, as far as I can see, very much by, and there's been somewhat of a gold rush. So the investors poured money into the altnets, and Graham will be much better able to describe kind of what's happening in the market than I can. But there's something of a gold rush, and altnets have been competing with each other to get away leaves for multi-dwelling units, residential multi-dwelling units. That left a big question as to what was happening with the single-dwelling units, and that's anything kind of in a block or a single dwelling below about 20 units. So it was never entirely clear that the market had a solution which would quickly deal with small MDUs, multi-dwelling units, and single-dwelling units. So that's been a question which hadn't adequately been answered, I think. Then in the last 18 months or so, there's been this contraction and consolidation in the industry. The investors, once again, Graham, much better able to give kind of an investor perspective than I can. But from where I sit, investors have sort of started questioning whether they're going to get the returns that were promised. That's partly because of competition for funds, and partly because the take-up hasn't been kind of at the level which was expected. So I think, once again, people on the panel better than I to answer this, but typically the take-up amongst the altnets has been around 10 to 15%, which is not the kind of take-up that the investors were expecting. So we've got, in a way, a perfect storm, because we've got this unanswered question about the single dwelling units and the odd property, and I'll qualify the idea of odd property, how that's going to be connected. Whereas until 18 months ago, you could see the rollout to multi-dwelling units, and particularly, certainly including social housing. But that's come to a crashing halt, and most of the altnets are now consolidating on take-up of where they've put fibre in blocks and not putting new fibre into blocks. And when I say about odd dwellings, I think it's really important to understand. I think you used the phrase pockets. I've used the phrase patchy. In Greenwich, currently the position is 20,000 homes out of about 100,000, 120,000 haven't got gigabit connectivity or capable of getting gigabit connectivity. Across local London, the figure is about 110,000. So it's a considerable number, and if we could be confident that that was going to be addressed in the next 6 months or the next 2 years, then I think we could sort of sit back and say, well, we've just got to allow the market to sort of do what it's got to do. But I think there's a serious concern that we'll be back here in 2 years' time not having made much progress with those dwellings which haven't got connectivity. So once again, that's why I say I think it's a really useful time. We know the government is looking at measures that it can introduce for urban areas. I think it would be good if that could be accelerated. The Mayor has published his growth plan for London. Connectivity features in that. And it has to underpin that. And I think for us in Greenwich, but I think it's true for all of us, that we see it as absolutely crucial for our economy, for the amenity of our residents, for the changing nature of the economy, people working at home, people studying at home and so on, but also the delivery of the next generation of public services. So if we're going to address this productivity issue in the public sector, we have to be delivering our services differently. That means kind of greater use of digital services. That is reliant on people having good connectivity, the infrastructure being in place, and then it being affordable, which I think is an issue that you're coming to in a subsequent panel. But when we talk about digital exclusion, there's the physical aspects. You can be wealthy and highly skilled and highly motivated, but if you actually haven't got the connectivity, you're digitally excluded. If you haven't got the skills, if you haven't got the wealth to pay for those services, you can obviously be excluded in that way as well. But having the infrastructure there is fundamental to where I think we all want the future of London to be.
Okay, thank you very much. Trevor, we are having some sound issues this morning. Would you mind bringing the mic a bit closer to you, please? Thank you very much. And I should have said at the beginning of this section of questions that these first few questions are about the infrastructure itself. Graham, is there anything you'd like to add?
The reasons for poor connectivity are quite complex, actually. If we come to the money, I mean, the deployment of new networks is very...
I'm so sorry, Graham. Could you do the same as well?
Absolutely.
Bring the mic a bit closer to you.
Absolutely fine.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the deployment of networks is very capital intensive, requires a lot of money. So we spent £1 billion in building a network of 1.3 million homes, of which about 400,000 are social housing, MDUs specifically, so just give you a sense of how much money is involved. And Trevor's right that the funding has become much tougher, largely because of interest rates. So from 2022 onwards, interest rates went up and the availability of money to build networks declined. And therefore, networks with money like ourselves built where we could build quickly and to try and get as many homes covered as we possibly could. But I think within that context, when the money is there, even when the money was there, actually quite a lot of localised factors led to different levels of adoption and build of the network, one of which was, frankly, the enthusiasm with which boroughs embraced broadband connectivity for their residents as something near the top of their priority list. And it's quite clear when you look at the levels of availability of fibre amongst London boroughs. Those boroughs that were most enthusiastic, put most support in from the leadership and resourced accordingly, have actually got the best availability, certainly from the likes of ourselves in terms of alternative providers. We then get into some very practical points. So we started off building to MDUs. That was our core primary focus. And we found that we could only build a certain volume of MDUs in any particular month because of the policies, the practices, the processes, the resourcing that was available within the big landlords, whether they be borough landlords or whether they be sort of social housing landlords. You could only build so much. And so we actually changed our strategy and started to build to single-dwelling units, which we could build much, much more quickly. And to give you an indication, when we were building at our maximum amount, which was about 50,000 homes per month, about 6,000 were MDUs in the social housing sector. All the rest were single dwelling. And that was despite enormous amounts of energy and effort going in to try and do more. We wanted to do a lot more, but it's just complex, practically complex, delivering to MDUs in the social housing, borough, housing authority, housing association context. So there's some of the practical complexities, even when the money is available.
Thank you. You've all outlined some of the challenges. Are there any, just the last question that I have, are there any other challenges that you would like to identify, or do you think you've covered them all?
I'd probably say, just in general, London is more expensive to build in rather than your other cities across or your rural areas. So that's also a challenge for the operators as well. So you get less for your money in terms of that build, just because of the way our city's built up. It's just harder to build.
I would disagree with that, actually. Yeah, London's actually quite cheap to build in relative to some of the rural areas, I think, just from our practical experience.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, we're hearing the opposite in the industry, so from competitors.
That's what we like to see, a diversion of opinions here. Trevor, you looked like you wanted to say something.
No, I think I'll come back to it, I think. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. I will now pass on to Assembly Member Georgiou.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. So for all of you, what has been your experience? And by the way, for ask this question, don't all be nice about local authorities. I know, Trevor, you're a bit biased, but we want to, as the Chair said, as broad of an opinion as we can get. So what has been your experience of working with London's local authorities and landlords to obtain access to land to carry out works?
Happy to answer. It's been very varied. We have built our network in all of the London boroughs. As I mentioned earlier, the ones that really embraced it early in terms of really realising that connectivity for their residents was going to be very powerful and valuable and useful, who then allocated time and effort, not much effort, not many people, but some people, to drive the programme amongst their portfolio of properties and homes, made the most progress. So it was like willing demand for access and willing supply from the likes of ourselves to go and build that, and that worked very well. Others were very slow to appreciate the need, very slow to grant way leaves, and actually very slow, once way leaves have been granted, to actually allocate resource and effort to get the various blocks built. So it is a fairly complex chain to go from desire to actually having connectivity, and all of those elements of the chain need to be in play, and the boroughs run very differently.
There are companies like the Altnets, Community Fibre, Hyperoptic, where the boroughs have signed master way leave agreements, and then they have reneged on the build because it's not commercially viable 18 months in. So they start to cherry pick what's commercially viable for them for their returns on investment. So I would disagree to say that it was purely a case of way leaves, because I have been part of the way leave process where master way leaves have been signed. They have had access to survey all sites, but then only chosen the ones that suit them to then build to.
Thank you, Stacey. Trevor.
Well, you quite rightly said that I'm not entirely unbiased. In Greenwich, we have never refused a way leave, in my experience, which in this instance sort of goes back 2 or 3 years. I mean, it's not perfect by any manner or means, and we can get frustrated by kind of the time it takes to actually get a kind of way leave signed. But it's an important process. We're giving permission to people to put fibre into our buildings. They're drilling holes in our walls. Our residents can get upset. So there's a process. I think 3-4 years ago, probably when the first sort of way leave requests came in, people were scratching their heads as to who was meant to deal with it and so on. In my experience, that isn't the case now. We're all sort of very familiar with the concept of way leaves and what needs to happen. I'm sure it works better in some boroughs than others, and probably it works better in all boroughs once they've done some, in the sense. So, there is a process of learning and so on. The other flip side of the coin, the providers can be very aggressive in the way they approach things. I think we're pretty proactive, but we've been threatened with court on a number of occasions. We also have, very kind of well-known connectivity providers who have put fibre into buildings without permission and then just blame their subcontractor. So it's not a perfect situation, I would say. But I think there's been a bit of an obsession with way leaves. And firstly, I think you were clear that you were talking about way leaves in the public sector, but there's also kind of the process of getting way leaves in the private sector, which I don't think necessarily is particularly smooth either. And it is a bump in the road which can be smoothed out. But at this moment in time, we are getting no requests other than from Openreach for any way leaves. And that's simply because of the change in the market. So, frankly, I could stand outside the town hall and wave the way leaves and say, free way leaves, come and get them. And they might take them and just sort of store them. But that is not the issue today. I think 2 years ago, I think it would have all been about way leaves. Today is just a factor, but I don't think it's the main factor.
Brilliant, thank you. So my next question, and perhaps one word or one sentence answers would be helpful. Other than way leaves, are there any other main challenges?
Funding.
Okay.
We talked about it. And Trevor's right, it's not the way leave. There's lots of way leaves. But it's the process from way leave to build.
Okay.
Is very, very time consuming.
Stacey?
Yeah, I think it's working in collaboration with a local authority to make sure that every resident gets access to it, not just the ones that suit their commercial deployment.
Thank you. And I think, Trevor, anything to
Well,
add to that?
I'm not sure what Graham means when he says the process from the way leave to the build. I don't know if that's a kind of complaint about the local authority or whether there's something else. I'm not sure.
I think it's a combination of resourcing, because it takes resource to deploy network to the various blocks within an estate, and the various processes around engagement of the right teams with the right experience to make the decision to give approval to build. And that's very, very variable across the boroughs.
Right.
Sometimes very slick, sometimes not.
Did that clarify?
It did. Can I just play it back? Because I think it might be helpful to you. I think there's the issue of a way leave, permission to access our properties. And then there's approval of the method statement. I think that's what you're referring to, which is the more sort of technical building aspects. So I think in my experience, once again, it can always be better that we put quite a lot of pressure on ourselves to actually get the way leaves turned around. And I'm hoping Graham isn't going to produce some evidence of some delay in Greenwich, because it does happen. But generally, we try to ensure that the way leave is granted, because actually we want the fibre that the companies are putting in. So it's not in our interests. It's not part of our policy to slow it down. But I just wanted to sort of clarify that it's at two-stage process. We in Greenwich tend to do the thing together. We don't issue the way leave until the method statement has been approved. But I think if you've got a master way leave agreement, then the two processes are separated.
All right. I think I've heard the term way leave more in this past 10 minutes I've ever heard in my life. Very briefly, because I'm conscious of time and I've got the chair glaring at me. Are there any approaches? I'm joking. Are there any approaches or initiatives that have made it easier to carry out works? So I'll start with Graham. If there aren't any, that's okay. That's what this whole investigation's about.
I think it's been entirely localised in terms of the way of working with individual boroughs. I mean, it really is as simple as that.
Yeah, but that's working with individual boroughs.
Indeed.
Are those specific initiatives?
No, they are purely the allocation of resource and time and effort.
Okay, thank you. Stacey?
I would say the boroughs that have allocated digital champions, so there's a prioritisation within sort of a senior management perspective that pushes that agenda down, that digital infrastructure is important to the growth of the economy and just the connectivity of their residents and businesses. That tends to kind of work well.
Thank you. And Trevor?
I think it's effectively the same. I think a good relationship with the industry and having points of contact. Some companies kind of do it better than others. And on the local authority side, I think it's the same thing, actually having a focal point. Because Wayleave requests, said it again, come in at from two different people, and actually having a place for it to go and then be sort of fed into the machine, I think is useful.
Yeah. No, brilliant. I mean, it sounds like there's nothing specific out there with any particular London borough. I think going back to what you were saying, Graham, it's more of a resource thing rather than any particular initiative. So, yeah, let's get loads of fibre in the ground.
I think the importance of a digital champion is very real, actually. Yeah, that's a good observation.
I see this across London. Do they actually do anything? I mean,
they do, because within the organisations, they gather momentum and they gather resource to enable things to happen. Okay. So that is an important observation, I think.
And I think they're also an advocate as well, to align the priorities. So I think local authorities have a priority also. They don't necessarily understand kind of what they need to fulfil that. So the advocate can actually be helpful in overcoming some of the bumps.
And very, very briefly, last question, starting Graham. Contributions from developers, landlords, whoever, because that's clearly one of the biggest things. So 106 Hill, things like that. Do we see those going towards putting fibre into the ground?
Not to my knowledge. No.
Right, okay.
No.
All right. Do you think, Stacey, I don't know what your experience has been in the South East, if developers are stumping up the cash?
From a fibre perspective?
Yeah.
No, they've reined it in.
Okay. And Trevor?
No, I mean, there's planning policies, but I've not seen SEAL used, for example.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember Georgiou, I was actually smiling at you. So if you think that was glaring, I've obviously got a lot of work to do on my communication skills. Can I just ask, and I should have interrupted earlier, but you were in such flow. We all know what Wayleave Agreement is. But for anyone who's listening and is desperately trying to look it up at the moment, because we've mentioned it so many times, I wonder if, Stacey, could you just tell us in a few words what that is, please?
I think probably Graham would be the best to answer that.
It's basically a permission of a landowner to allow us as network operators to deploy our equipment in their premises, on their buildings, and the various rights associated with that for both parties.
Basically does what it says on the box. Thank you.
Indeed, yeah.
Thanks very much. Assemblymember Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Not often confused with Assemblymember Georgiou, but morning all. Just wanted to come back to you, Stacey, because you made a point earlier about local authorities, and I just wondered if there's any particular interventions from local authorities that have proved successful in areas with poor broadband.
Are you talking about deployment of new infrastructure?
Yeah.
Back to my point of a digital champion, so their role is to gather the resource internally, but that is cross-functional, so whether that be economic development, your parking, highways, digital teams and your planning officers, as well as having a digital ambassador at a senior level, so whether that be your elected member, whether it be or your chief exec or assistant chief exec, anyone who can champion digital and send the message down that it's a priority. And when we're considering applications for public realm regeneration, economic development sites, new housing schemes, it should be a digital by default process. So for gas, water, electricity, digital infrastructure, both fixed and mobile, should be included in those plans. Can we leave space for a mobile mast? Can we engage in the operators before the plans go in? All those sorts of information. So from a local borough perspective, I think having someone to coordinate that is really important.
It's really helpful. It's a really helpful description as well, because I was in the room when we were deciding, at least in Barnet, where I'm also a councillor, when we were deciding on a digital champion and what this person would do. And it was actually just the decision to have one brought us all together to kind of focus on why it was important to a point when now we have one, and watching his role develop, it's really good to see. But your description of it, I think, is really helpful, because it's more than just having a named champion for something, but it's what they do and kind of what it enables. So thank you for expanding on that. This is just to anyone who wants to answer this question. I'm not going to pick on you individually. But are there benefits to a regional approach? I mean, London, we're obviously 32 boroughs plus the city. Are there benefits to a regional approach to facilitating the deployment of fibre optic broadband infrastructure in London, as opposed to working individually?
Okay, so I work in a sub-region, so I cover 5 boroughs. There's 4 of me across London, so I have counterparts in East, Central and West. And what we do is we coordinate a sort of sub-regional approach. So each of the boroughs, as other panellists have talked about, will have similar challenges, obviously at different scales. We have a mixture of demographics, we have housing crisis, we have a lot of problems, but being able to sort of collaborate and pull together our resources and having that economies of scale, so whether that be going out to joint procurements together to be able to interface with the operators for more investment, whether it being clever with those tendering processes about how we drive investment into the areas that are needed, whether it's lobbying for funding. I think having the sub-regional/regional approach for London is really important. And I think, especially from a central government perspective, being able to show that, with all the discussions that we have around devolved regions and funding, that really what we really need to do is look at the communities and speak to the people on the ground about what's needed in their area. Urban voucher schemes versus investment in dark fibre. There's lots of talk about data centres, AI, innovation, growth corridors. None of that will be able to happen without real proper investment in dark fibre infrastructure. And right now we don't have that in London. There's not enough of it. And I think being able to have those conversations at a regional level to say this is what our city needs to be a hyper-connected, world-class, digital infrastructure-led city. It's not going to cut it just having low-level business-grade broadband or fibre to the cabin. It's still, in certain parts, we really need to be talking about what proper investment in digital infrastructure means and what that can drive and grow for the sort of the government's ambitions.
That's great. Trevor, did you want to comment?
I mean, I would merely emphasise that I think there is, and I think the Mayor has actually played an important kind of advocacy role and coordination role in discussions with government. I think there's more to be done, and I think maybe we'll come on to that. But I think there's no doubt that there's good work has been done, building links with industry at a regional level, kind of bringing the boroughs together at a regional level. And I think some of the things that sort of Graham's wanted to see and has improved is down to that sort of coordination, that we're kind of working together, we're not in isolation.
Yeah, thank you. And what are those challenges of bringing boroughs to working together? I mean, we talk about it on all sorts of different subjects in this assembly. There are real challenges of boroughs working together. But what I find interesting is it feels like, depending what the subject is, the challenges are different. So what are those challenges?
I think in this context, I think you're probably gathering it from some of the discussions so far. This is quite a specialist area, and some boroughs have kind of invested in that, in developing those skills and that knowledge. Others less so, and I think it is an interesting thing. And I think if you're not being approached by industry, if you're not under pressure from industry, it's easy to kind of get on with the day job. And I think that bringing together boroughs who are in different places, different levels of knowledge, is extremely extremely valuable. Now, I mean, I don't bring the boroughs together, so I don't know exactly what the challenges are. But I think in local London, I can see that, you know, a couple of years ago, kind of people came to discussions on connectivity from all different areas. Now there's a sense of, okay, yeah, we've got our act together, we know who's leading on it in our borough, we will attend these meetings regularly. So I think it's organisation and a level of priority, and I think the sub-regional discussions and the regional discussions have kind of forced this to be higher up the agenda on some of the boroughs which, for whatever reason, have kind of lagged behind a bit.
I mean, probably not much more to add than that. I mean, like I say, I worked across the 5 South London boroughs, and my job is to sort of pull them together. So setting up digital infrastructure groups across everyone, and just knowledge transfer. If someone's doing something really good and it's working, then, you know, let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's try it in other boroughs as well to see if that might help them with interfacing with the operators and driving investment and speeding up deployment. So I think it's just a case of knowledge transfer and being a bit more open and honest with each other and having that sort of forum to do that.
All right, thank you. And thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We're now moving on to questions about deploying broadband to premises. Assembly Member Polanski.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Graham, if I can move to you, I think we've brushed on this, but just if you've got anything else to add. Data shows flats are less likely to have broadband connections in place compared to houses. What fundamentally is driving this?
So I think it's typically been as I mentioned earlier, the pace with which you're able to build, particularly in sort of the social housing sort of environments. And that's predominantly around all of the things that we've discussed and Trevor's mentioned in terms of the practicalities of deploying fibre into a building and making sure the health and safety is there, making sure resident engagement is handled, all of which takes quite a long time. So it takes a lot more time to deploy fibre to a block of flats, whether it's a big block or a small block, than it does to a single dwelling unit, which is effectively you deploy it to a pole and then you contact the customer and they say yes or no. So it's a much simpler process to deploy into the single dwelling environment than it is to the MDU environment.
Thank you. And Stacey, moving to you, to what extent is there a divide in London between multi-dwelling units and single occupier dwellings with regards to broadband connectivity? And I know it's something, again, we've touched on.
Yeah, but I mean, to touch on that, I mean, there's definitely been, from kind of 2018 up till 2022, that real gold rush that Trevor mentioned around wayleaves for MDUs, and that was all really the likes of your monopoly players, so Virgin Media, Openreach and your altnets were interested in. They didn't want the SDUs, they only wanted MDUs because they built once and then could hit 14, 18, 25 houses or premises within that block. So it was a better return on investment, you know, rather than doing one build to a single dwelling unit. So up until this point, there has been a massive differentiation between MDUs being connected and SDUs not being connected, even though they've been passed. So I think it's a case of working with the operators to go back, put more investment in, and working obviously with local authorities themselves to say, make sure that your social housing tenants and SDUs know that there's fibre availability in their street and that there's social tariffs available to them to help them adopt that.
Thank you. And at the end of that gold rush, I think someone said before that was to do with interest rates. Is that your assessment too?
Yes, that's what's happened. It was almost, they were signing wayleaves left, right and centre as a bit of a land grab, I suppose. We had 4 or 5 different altnets trying to build in the same place, so we almost had this effect of a potential overbuild. Now, it's not a bad thing. I think competition is really good for residents and businesses, so I'm not demonising overbuild at all, but what's happened is we have overbuild in lots of areas and hardly any build in others. So I think that's really what's happened. That gold rush is they came in, land grabbed, and it's sometimes had a bit of a detrimental effect because each of the altnets believes the other one's building, and actually no one's building, and it's sterilised an area. Nobody's building at all. So that's sort of where we found it to be. I hope that's answered the question.
No, that's really interesting. Thank you. And Trevor, just to see if you've got any thoughts on either of these questions around houses and flats and multi-dweller occupiers.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a problem with both, frankly. I think until 18 months ago, we could see a trajectory where our multi-dwelling units in social housing were going to be connected, and many have been. And in a way that was driving the industry. And once again, this is Graham's kind of business, but many of the altnets kind of were seeking out social housing and MDUs. I mean, presumably because they saw it as a cost-effective option. Since the gold rush ended, I think we're seeing very little new build as in new network being built in MDUs. So at this moment in time, I would say there's a problem with MDUs. And actually, I think there's always been the problem with SDUs because there is, it's relatively expensive. Once again, Graham was, it's his business. It's relatively expensive to get to MDUs, except the point about poles. But there's not that many poles kind of in kind of London. I mean, these are telegraph poles with wires coming off. There's none in my street. There definitely are, around. But if you're actually digging to get to a single dwelling unit, making the connection to a spine that's already there, I'm guessing for the industry that's relatively expensive. And in the residential market, people don't lock themselves into particularly long contracts. So you could go to quite a lot of expense to connect someone, and a year later they could change their provider. I mean, I think my only point that I'm really trying to make is I don't think it's as simple as saying MDU's not a problem, SDU's a problem, or vice versa. I think, this patchiness, these gaps in provision that we're kind of referring to, cover both MDUs and cover both single dwelling units. And I think Graham can kind of explain better the kind of the way his business has moved, because I think it started out very much driven by MDUs, and in the last 18 months or so has sort of transitioned more towards SDUs. That's your company's kind of response to the market, I guess.
Well, to be honest, it was more that we just couldn't get the volume of MDUs for all the reasons I explained. No matter how much we tried, we could not build more than 6,000 a month. Just because of the approvals processes required across multiple landlords to get blocks built. And that was just too slow. So we moved to single dwelling units. And
and that's a fair industry response to the market, as they say. The kind of reality is that leaves, gaps, it leaves people behind. And I mean, there's others, and I think the whole industry is going through some sort of transition. Because the hyperoptics of this world, the community fibres of this world, Forth Utilities of this world, and so on, were all building in MDUs, and that seemed to be the priority. They've all stopped, and it's not clear kind of when it will start again.
Yeah, maybe the market's a problem, but I won't open that can of worms. I think
we have to acknowledge that the market. I mean, the market has achieved an awful lot, and community fibre is a very good example of what has been achieved with private investment, and there's been incredible investment. But it is not a perfect market. So we've got a situation where there's overbuild in some areas, where the altnets are competing with each other. So and that's not viable. There's concern about take-up, and the take-up's too small, and therefore the returns of investment aren't great enough. Elsewhere, you've got the two big giants of Openreach and Virgin, kind of doing their thing. It's just not a perfect market, and I think that's where we've all got to, the kind of recognition that the market is not going to provide for everybody, and there needs to be intervention of one sort or another, kind of working very closely with industry, collaborating, everything. It's not a pointing of the finger and saying they're to blame, we're not. But if we're concerned, if we want to get to a position that everybody's got the connectivity they need to have, we need to recognise that the market is not currently going in the right direction. And others will challenge that, and the big incumbents would challenge that and say no, they're going to cover everything. Well, they haven't yet, and the question is, well, when are they going to?
Quite. And can I just clarify one more thing as a final question? At the very beginning, about an hour ago, you opened your comments by saying there'd been some movement, but the future it was looking more pessimistic now. Were you referring directly about multi-dwelling units, or was that about something else?
I was referring to multi-dwelling units. I mean, as I was saying that I think one could see a trajectory with multi-dwelling units. Personally, I was always concerned about any building which wasn't a multi-dwelling unit, which is basically any block above 20. And so anything below 20, it was slightly unclear as to when the market would meet that need. But in the last 18 months, because of interest rates, I think because of the lower returns than hoped for, and the general consolidation in the market, I think the question that MDUs is back on the table as a concern.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Small-Edwards.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. What options are available to connect premises to your fibre optic network if a landlord is unresponsive or kind of unwilling to grant that access? And I know the Product Safety and Telecommunications Infrastructure Act kind of was brought in to ease that process, and how effective has that kind of been in your view?
Yeah, we do have something called Code Powers, which ultimately, in the face of a landlord being unresponsive or unwilling, you could, in theory, go and build to their property. We've never exercised that power, partly because we've had properties that we could build where the landlord was willing, so why would you go down that path? And I'm not sure really how many people have actually tried the Code Powers route. Our view generally is it's unlikely to be terribly productive, because there are plenty of ways that landlords can foil your attempt to enter their property. Or they could claim that you've incurred large amounts of damage that you haven't made good. So you could end up with really quite a contentious situation for very little benefit overall. So the powers exist, but I think they're not terribly usable.
Thank you. And Trevor, Stacey, from your perspective, is reluctance to grant access or just unresponsiveness like a big issue in terms of rollout of fibre optic broadband?
Not from a borough perspective, I wouldn't say. I mean, we have, like I said earlier, I have boroughs who have signed way-leave agreements, and yet the altnets have now stopped building. I said earlier that it was expensive to build in London. Graham countered that and said that it wasn't. My boroughs are open for build, have a way-leave in place. It's cheap to build, and they're still not coming. All of our MDUs still aren't connected. So maybe that's a conversation to be had as well about, well, what is the barrier then? Because we've put everything in place that you asked us to. You've told us it's cheap to build.
It's lending and equity availability. The lenders are much more reluctant to invest in fibre network build. So the money just isn't there.
I mean, we've always approved, perhaps not as quickly as we could have, but we've always approved. So we've never got to a position where we've refused a way leave. We would only refuse a way leave if technically we were really concerned about the method that was being engaged, and companies like Community Fibre know what they're doing, and across the industry, the method statements we receive are very competent. So we've never been in the position. So I think frankly, for industry, they've got two options. One is to go down the Code Power route, and I've been threatened with it, but I've got no experience of it being done, or they give up and move on. And because if it's so difficult, why would they? There's other places they can go. And we get complaints from residents in private blocks that the landlord and the provider kind of are not talking and need to sort it out, and they each blame each other. But there's very little we can do about that as a local authority.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Garrett.
Thanks. I suppose rounding off this session, looking at the Mayor, what he's doing, what he could be doing. So he said he wants London to be the best connected city in Europe, which I'm not sure we're quite there yet. I just wondered what your thoughts were on the interventions that that the Mayor has brought in to support rollout of gigabit broadband, particularly, I suppose, in those areas that are struggling, that don't have that gigabit broadband, or perhaps even good broadband at all. I don't know. Stacey, were you reaching for your mic?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah.
I'm happy to start. So yes, the Mayor had allowed us money from the Strategic Investment Fund, so the SIF pot, where we got £1 million per borough to deploy fibre footprint to public sector assets. So we worked as part of the TfL concession framework with that one and drove dark fibre. It was a really good opportunity for the boroughs because they got to connect their public sector assets, so whether it be council buildings, community centres, libraries, CCTV, which then also helped with the Mayor's agenda of improving CCTV safety and violence against women on the streets, etc. So it was a really good initiative. It's not enough, it's been good, and we're very thankful for anything that we can get in, but it's more funding needed from central government, from different pots that could be to drive that. We've managed to connect a lot of our assets, but there's still a lot to be done, and because of subsidy rules, obviously we can't put up front too much, so the competition in the market can't benefit from that. So we've had to work with what we've got to connect our public sector assets, but to drive the network into areas with those assets that haven't been connected and underconnected. So to go back to your point of the Mayor wanting it to be the most connected city in Europe, I think we've got a long way to go on both fixed and mobile for that.
So the £1 million then, that wasn't for rolling out and couldn't be used for rolling it out to residents or businesses. That was
correct.
Connecting
public sector
libraries, council offices,
it was
CCTV,
correct. It was to drive fibre, dark fibre footprint within South London. So that's what we did.
Don't fill people in on what dark fibre.
It's unlike, so it was once it's in the building, you can then put a service on top of it. But the dark fibre has much more capabilities, more capacity to drive kind of further ways to go into residential areas, to go into business parks, retail sites. That's really what we need for data centre investment as well.
Okay. Graham, did you have anything on, I mean, as the Mayor, it sounds like it's difficult for the Mayor to support you because of the subsidy rules.
I think so, exactly, yeah. So we'd never expected or received any financial backing, which is fine. But the Mayor has indeed been very supportive, yeah, and where we have, in the early days, had some difficulties opening the door to some of the boroughs. Certainly his and his office were very supportive in making sure we were then able to have a conversation about the deployment. That was in the early days of struggling to find fibre. And he's also been very supportive in terms of digital inclusion, using some of the community centres that have been connected up as an important initiative, I think, in terms of enabling people who are maybe not so confident in accessing digital services.
Yeah, maybe there's a lesson for the Mayor making pledges about things he's legally not allowed to do. That's not a question for you, though. That's perhaps a question for him. One of his initiatives was the Connected London team that started in 2017, and two of the goals were about having 29 boroughs with standard way leave agreements in place and 100% of borough-owned social housing having an agreement between the freeholder and full fibre. I don't know whether you, Graham, or perhaps you, from a Greenwich point of view, have... do you have any? We've not been able to find out. That was supposed to happen by this month. We haven't been able to find out from the Mayor whether that's happened. I don't know from your end whether that looks like it's happening or feels a long way off.
On the way leaves, was that?
Yes. Well, or either of those.
I don't know the position across London. I certainly know because we were given updates at sort of various times that there's been a lot of progress towards master way leave agreements in the boroughs, because I think that was the aim. In Greenwich, we've chosen not to do master way leave agreements, but we issue individual way leave agreements, and we've issued a lot, probably 200 in the last couple of years, probably covering about 15,000 properties. So we've just taken a different approach, but we've kind of with the spirit of the Mayor's ambition. Whether all boroughs have signed a master way leave agreement, I truly don't know, but the majority definitely will have done.
Okay. Was that your... So either on... So 29 boroughs having a standardised or master way leave agreement and 100% of borough-owned social housing having an agreement between the freeholder and a full fibre. I don't know what that looks... Obviously, you're looking at a wider area.
Yeah, I believe we must... If we're not there, we must be very close, but I don't have the actual figures. But the last report that was out maybe a year ago, Trevor, wasn't it? I think we were almost there, that the majority of boroughs across London had master way leave agreements in place with at least one operator.
Okay. And perhaps we'll go back to the Mayor and press him for... Because anyway, he's not here, so I can't ask him that question. The other thing that the Mayor was doing, he set up the London Infrastructure Group, and obviously that was broader than just this, but included this. I don't know whether any of you have had any dealings with that, or you're involved in it, or whether you have any thoughts on either what it has done, hasn't done, or could do.
Yeah, I think it was the sort of infrastructure sharing initiative, wasn't it? Particularly where people who were using the roads in London or were doing works in London, whether it be water, electricity, gas, broadband, etc., to pull those together to work to reduce the amount of disruption. And I think there are a number of, very productive meetings with a lot of senior executives from the various different utility providers in London that I think has delivered an amount of savings, reduced disruption by greater coordination amongst utility providers. I think that's a long run, that's a difficult thing to achieve with different timings for investment in these various different infrastructures. But certainly I think where the sharing can take place, there's been fairly good progress and certainly some good improvements in terms of the availability of the mapping of where the infrastructure is in London, because it's not just about new build, it's also about avoiding the destruction of stuff that's already in the ground, which can disrupt services. And I think there's been good progress on that particular element of it.
Okay, just to round, are there any other things then that are on your mind you think the Mayor ought to be doing this or could be doing this, or somebody could and maybe it could be him?
On infrastructure specifically, or on broadband?
On broadband, yeah.
I think on broadband maybe making an even stronger voice, if possible, for an appropriate share of the BDUK funding for broadband. It's interesting that London is now one of the very few areas that is still described as still in planning, in terms of the allocation of funding from that quite substantial pot of, I think, up to £5 billion. And there are areas of London that will need financial support, and that fund is a suitable fund, I think, for that.
So what is that fund and what is it for?
It's effectively for the rollout of broadband across the country. Predominantly it started off as the thinking was it would mainly be rural areas which were difficult from an economic point of view to build to. And now there are many BDUK regional projects that have been allocated to one provider or another. But London is an area where there's none so far, and there is money available, we believe, and we do believe as someone who has built in London, there are some areas that we would never build even if we had many, many billions of pounds, just because of the cost of them. So the work to identify those properties would be valuable, and I think maybe having allowed a voice for the right share for Londoners within that fund would be a good thing.
Well, I suppose any share is better than 0%, isn't it? So we can only improve. I don't know if you have off the top of your head, are there parts of London that you think, or types of places in London that would work best for? Because obviously some parts of London are quite rural.
Indeed, yes. So rural is one good example where the houses are a good distance apart, and there's therefore more cost. But equally, I think there are quite a few areas, things like cul-de-sacs, which are off the main drag, if you like, can be very, very costly to build to, and may not reach anyone's build plans, just because they're slightly awkward and therefore very costly, where some sort of voucher scheme, and I think there's a voucher scheme capability within the BDUK arrangements, could prove very beneficial, where the residents club together, say they use the vouchers, and someone will then build the infrastructure to those homes, for example. So it's not just big empty areas. I think there are little knot spots all across London.
Thanks very much.
Could I just come in on that? Because I think, in terms of direction of travel, that's certainly something which we, and I think many of the boroughs would wish to see. There has been this, the kind of incentives available for industry outside of the metropolitan areas. I think there is a greater recognition that there are challenges in metropolitan areas, not just London, but other major cities as well. And I'm hopeful there'll be some sort of positive news on that. And generally, kind of what we're talking about, just to be clear, is in other parts of the country, BDUK make vouchers available to reduce to provide a subsidy. So if you're connecting your home but the provider says no, it's too expensive, you can claim a voucher, and that's not been available in metropolitan areas and would help. And once again, I'd say this is a problem across London. This isn't a kind of, it might be bigger in some areas, but it isn't a few properties. There's 20,000 properties in Greenwich, 100,000 in the local London area. which are basically not spot properties. They're not going to get fibre. The BDUK does its open market review. Nobody's saying they're going to go in and put fibre into those properties. It's baffling to understand why, because in some cases one side of the street, is getting it and the other side isn't. But it's to address the properties that won't get fibre based upon BDUK's own analysis. And so vouchers is one, which we would like to see. And, as I say, that's merely applying to London and other metropolitan areas, what is available elsewhere. And secondly, the other kind of instrument which BDUK use is to directly contract with providers to put fibre into the ground. You see big announcements from outside London. The company X has been awarded a £20 million contract to put fibre into Hertfordshire or wherever. That hasn't been available because of the perception that the market will provide and the concern about subsidy rules hasn't been available in metropolitan areas, and we'd like to see that as well. And that would help address the dark fibre, the need for more dark fibre, which can then be utilised. And we would also go further to say that we would like to see the funding, if that were to happen and there were to be procurements through BDUK, we'd like to see the funding devolve down. Probably in the case of London to the mayor or to the sub-regional partnerships, because if it's a national procurement, there's very few companies which are large enough to take that up, and those are the same companies that should be pretty slow on occasion. So we'd like to that's what we would like to see, a kind of urban vouchers available, procurement in areas where there's an under provision of fibre, dark fibre, and some it not kind of controlled nationally, but it devolved down to the appropriate level.
Okay, so that sort of 100,000 odd properties you mentioned that don't have it and aren't, as things stand, aren't going to get it, they could get it from this national fund. Are you aware that the mayor is sort of lobbying for that, or are you suggesting this is a thing he could be doing but isn't, as far as we know?
I'm sorry. Well, I don't know kind of what he's doing. He has certainly been lobbying for it. And it's been something that we've been aware of for the past kind of 18 months or so, that we kind of needed this level of support. And I think the door is slightly ajar with BDUK and government. We just need to make sure that it's sort of fully opened, and the vouchers are available for as many premises that need it as possible. I think one of the things that I think the Mayor can continue to help with is the kind of analysis across London of the position. It's difficult for individual boroughs to do. But kind of any vouchers will be good, of course, but we'd like to see vouchers available for all the properties that kind of require some level of subsidy. So I think there's a continued lobbying to do. I think it would be unfair to say the lobbying hasn't happened, but I think there's a need for continuing lobbying.
Okay, great. So do you want anything on that, Stacey?
No, just to say that I work quite closely with the Connected London's team, and we signed NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, on behalf of our boroughs to be able to view and analyse the data from BDUK, which we have pushed back on. So we are doing a lot of lobbying. We are talking about devolve it to us, because we know from a GLA perspective, from a London perspective, where our economic growth zones are, where the fibre is really needed, whether it be residents, businesses, data centres. But yes, I'm all for more lobbying. So
just one quick question then. Yeah. So on that devolution, are you lobbying for it to be devolved to the GLA or to boroughs, to yourselves as a sub-regional partnership, or anyone who will take it?
It would probably definitely not to the boroughs. That would be probably too much for 33 different procurements to be running, and I think that's far too much to ask. But either from a sub-regional or from a GLA perspective, it'd be great, because we can work closely with the communities or business improvement districts, and then obviously look at the London Growth Plan to see about these innovation corridors, growth zones, and show that actually the investment needs to go for certain fibre in certain areas. So.
Great, thanks very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Before we end this part of the session, can I just go back and check on a couple of things? So the BDUK funding and the pot, Graham, could you just say, how long has that been available now?
I think it's 28.
It was a COVID response.
Was it?
Yeah, it was Boris Johnson's £5 billion BD UK funding for the whole of the UK to drive full fibre investment. So, sorry.
But sadly, London never received any of that.
No cities did. It was urban areas were sort of removed from the process. So it was focused on rural, semi-rural areas. I think there's one statistic that one of my colleagues, Robin Bosworth, throws around. It's Orkney in Scotland has more full fibre than the London Borough of Enfield.
Wow.
So just let that sink in.
And I mean,
yeah.
I think it's. Sorry, I think it's important to kind of emphasise the origin of that, and that's concern about it was EU subsidy rules, now UK subsidy rules, that the government shouldn't be competing, subsidising fibre, a fibre provider, and it was easier to make the case in rural areas. Because that's what industry was saying, they're not going to go there, than it was in industry areas. I mean, I don't think we've ever agreed with that, but that's been the starting point, that you had to overcome the concern about
it was a misconception, wasn't it? It was a misconception in the industry, whether it be government or market, that London's well connected. That's just a perception that people have because of a finance district or tourist hotspot, so people assume that we have fantastic connectivity.
Yeah, and I think the Open Market Review data, which is collected by BD UK, government agency, as kind of the penny dropped, because the industry was coming back, and Graham will be providing the data on that side of the fence to BD UK, and the penny dropped that the industry was identifying properties that they would connect in the next 3 years, and the properties they wouldn't connect. And that highlighted the fact that the market wasn't going to deliver on those properties, and some support was needed. So I think it's been a long time coming, and we don't know if it's coming, but we're kind of more optimistic that there will be that levelling up of that playing field, and the recognition that urban areas actually need support as well. And certainly the case has been made by the Mayor. Certainly the case has been made in Manchester and Birmingham and other major cities. We've yet to see that sort of payoff, but we live in hope.
Thank you. And also going back, Stacey, you said earlier about the altnet companies effectively not talking to each other, and that that explains why sometimes we just have deserts, because everyone thinks that somebody else is doing it. What can be done to facilitate those conversations so that these areas aren't left in the dark?
I think it's different difficult, should I say, because a lot of their information is commercially sensitive, and they're not going to share what their take-up rates are with each other. And that's natural. I can imagine that being the case. I don't know if you can mandate them to talk to each other and share data, but I think it would be really helpful to understand, just because you have a way leave agreement somewhere doesn't mean to say that they're building. And I have lots of examples of that in my boroughs where we have way leaves, but there's no one building. So I think being able to show that to the industry and say, if your competitor's not building and you know that the residents in there aren't on a package, would it be helpful for you to know that? I don't know how that would work, if I'm honest with you, but it's an idea.
And is any assessment ever done of what happens to these way leave agreements and how far they're pursued?
So what do you mean, sorry?
So you were saying that basically if there were way leave agreements and sometimes they're not being fulfilled, I mean, is there any way of...
There's no way of forcing the industry to... Like Graham said, if there's no money there to build, there's no money there to build. So they might... I'm just picking numbers, but if there's a...
But are you asking the question, do we know what the number of way leaves that have been issued that haven't been fulfilled?
Is that what you're asking about?
I wasn't, but that's a good question. Thank you.
Because I think the answer is we don't know.
I think
not across London. I wouldn't know that.
I think most of the boroughs know. We've had conversations, and we regularly track how many have we built, how many have we not built. So
each borough knows, but we don't know here today.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fairly well known, kind of the proportion of properties that have been connected. and the local authority will know definitely which buildings have been connected, but I don't think that's aggregated up anywhere, to my knowledge at least.
Yes, no, that the GLA will have that information.
Okay, the GLA do have that information.
Yeah, they will have that information because they will have the reports of how many premises are connected, how many MDU blocks are connected, and how many are left unconnected as part of that Wayleave agreement. So that should be available in the GLA.
Great, thank you very much. So we've now come to the end of our first panel. I'd like to thank you all for attending and asking the question, Trevor, and answering the questions with your insights. My lines here, it says we're going to adjourn for 5 minutes. I think it might be a little bit longer than that, unless our next panel was here a little bit earlier. In the meantime, I wonder if you would stay for a couple of minutes just to have a photo with the committee, please. Thank you very much, and let's just watch this space for when we come back. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome back to the Economy, Culture and Skills Committee meeting where we're discussing London's broadband connectivity. I'd like to welcome our second panel of guests. Laura Tim, who is the Greater London representative of the Federation of Small Businesses. Welcome, Laura, again, thank you. And Emma Stone, who's the Director of Evidence and Engagement for the Good Things Foundation. Welcome, Emma. So we'll go straight on to our questions, and they are about the impact of poor broadband connectivity on residents and businesses. And I will pass to Hina Assemblymember Bakari to ask the next question.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Emma, I'm going to focus my questions on the work that your charity does, which is primarily about digital exclusion and also making tech more accessible. And we've been hearing a lot about multi-dwelling units in the previous panel. Is this one of the reasons that there are certain demographics that seem to be most likely affected by poor and unreliable broadband, or are there other issues or other reasons for this?
Thanks so much. I just would like to take a step back, which I think is a way of responding to your question about are there other reasons for this? Because I was really struck by your focus here. You're wanting to understand about poor broadband connectivity specifically, and I kind of recognise that's important. But what I think really helps to acknowledge is you have to look at this holistically in the context of digital inclusion is about having not only sufficient data connectivity, but also a device and also the digital skills and confidence to use it. And I think that holistic thing is just important, because otherwise the answers to the questions are actually in the context of digital exclusion more broadly. It's also really important to think about affordability. So it's not only about the reliability, the extent of the broadband connectivity, the speed. It's actually, you can have that and still not be able to access it and benefit. And I think that links to the point as well about needing to take an intersectional approach. And so when you're asking that question, it's then about how does the dwelling you're in also intersect with other variables and characteristics, including low income, including age, including kind of family size and circumstance. And the circumstance is important because it's not only the dwelling, it's also the nature of your tenure. So, for example, I know that in a number of London boroughs, there'll be particular concerns around broadband access for those, especially families living in temporary accommodation, and sometimes in temporary accommodation for a long time. And I think the other thing is that connected to those issues about taking a holistic look, thinking about affordability, intersectionality, it also means that the question needs to be not only about broadband connectivity, but also actually about mobile coverage. So we've been part of a pioneering research programme, which is called the Minimum Digital Living Standards Research. The feasibility study for that focused on households with children. It was about engaging members of the public to say, what is it that a household in the UK today needs to feel digitally included? And actually what they talked about was you need, in combination, the kit, the connectivity, also the practical skills and the critical thinking skills. But within the context of connectivity, they were really clear that actually families need a combination of broadband at home and mobile. It's also about being able to get out and about. And of course, for some of those who are maybe least served and most disadvantaged, mobile data connectivity will be a particular lifeline for them. So it's a long answer, but I did really want to set that out because I think it's really important to how you're, in a way, how you're framing the question and how you might need to reframe it to really think about the impact on Londoners.
I mean, it sounds like there's a fairly complicated picture here of those people who are impacted by poor broadband connectivity. And you touched on affordability and increased costs. So could you go into that a little bit more in depth? You know, what has been the reason for these increased costs and the impacts that it's having on those communities?
I think we're looking across where we are now. We're to really, it's really interesting because broadband costs, mobile costs, are relatively low compared to some of the other household costs. But again, you can't take that out of the experience of households in the round. So the concern about digital poverty, people not being able to afford sufficient connectivity for their needs, is inseparable then from the wider pressures in terms of the cost of living, in terms of low income and poverty that households are facing. The concern around digital poverty is also about what happens if you are unable to access, or you only have intermittent access to broadband or mobile data connectivity, and what that then means for your ability to live, survive, access essential services, and change your own circumstances. So this is where, for example, we've recently worked with Trussell, the charity behind food banks, because they have a focus on deep poverty or destitution. We have a focus on digital exclusion. And so we wanted to understand what the data is telling us about the relationships between those two different issues. And it won't surprise you that overall the picture is painted of not only does poverty then impact on people's ability to meet what might be seen as competitive low costs, but nonetheless they're a cost that households in deep poverty are unable to afford. But importantly, what you also have is then if you can't afford your access, that can then tip you into deeper poverty. And I think it's revealing that for Trussell, some of their interest in exploring this with us emerged less from a policy focus, but more from what they were hearing through food banks on the ground, and what they were hearing through responses to their Hunger in the UK survey, which was showing that not having any internet access was far more likely amongst those using food banks and referred into food banks than amongst the general population. But also then to the extended impact of this, I think it was their latest survey found that 44% of those who were referred to food banks and did not have home internet access were severely socially isolated. And I think that also that's part of the wider story about just how important this is for people's lives, not only in terms of economic participation, which will be a focus for you, but actually in terms of people's social participation and connection.
It's really interesting that you're bringing the food bank issue into this. We've done a committee report on that as well, and one of the things that we learned from that report and the findings and discussions that we had with people using those food banks was that they want to access the support and the benefits that they need, but can't do it without that digital support. And there's also that digital literacy and the need to understand the systems that are in place. Yes. Is there an increase of that kind of barrier for those people, because there's, you can only access support, access benefits, access anything really through a digital means, that is causing even more barriers for those particular communities and the people that you're working with?
Yeah, absolutely, that's spot on. And I think we might talk about digital skills and confidence, and actually within that, this is where I think the minimum digital living standard research was really helpful, because this was about members of the public then trying to tease out, well, what does that mean at quite at a basic level, but sufficient to be able to participate and engage online. And you're right, that's about actually knowing how to do some real basics. And certainly this is where the Lloyds Consumer Digital Index reports are also really helpful, and I can share links to those. But you're talking about people not having the basics in terms of, for example, being able to download an app. I think importantly in relation to things like connectivity, it's also that understanding of how do you manage mobile data. So that's a great example of a very practical skill that actually, if you are on a low income, you need that more than probably many of the people in this room who might be able to afford unlimited data.
and actually knowing how you manage your data, how much data things need. We are in a world as well where a lot of the tools for remote working or for just being out and about can be quite data hungry. And it can also be, that's an extra level of cognitive load if you're thinking about actually how long will this mobile data last in my household for my children's learning, for remote working if I'm out and about. And I think, and this is also why I was kind of wanting to bring up the importance of both thinking about mobile as well as broadband, and just, so you've got that skill about navigating a market as well, working out what is the best deal, what do you need. I think it can be quite challenging to do as well, and I'm sure this will probably be the same for small businesses actually. What is the best package? What are the best rates? How much are you consuming? You know, we're asking ourselves to, we don't have to do that when we think, for example, about water. You know, the water comes out the tap. We're not needing to think how many litres of water am I likely to consume in the next day, in the next week. So I think you've got some of those skills specifically related to connectivity, as well as then some of the issues about kind of switching. I don't know if you noticed, but I think it was Which and Money and Mental Health Institute recently put out a report which was around what happens in terms of the haggling that consumers might need to do. And that's still relatively savvy consumers maybe wanting to find the better deal, or if they can't afford the tariff. So I think you've got a lot of different skills in that area, as well as how do you benefit from, navigate your way around different public services, different commercial services, because this isn't only about kind of public services. NHS, one of the things that we hear a lot from the community organisations, so the local hubs that are delivering support to people across London, across the United Kingdom, quite often under-resourced to do that, but they are doing that because people are coming in and going, I need to be able to get my blue badge, or I need to be able to kind of manage my universal credit journal, or I, you know, need to be able to apply for a job. And actually, the interfaces are all different. You'll know that. Every, you know, GP practices, local authorities, it's actually quite difficult to get a kind of standardised experience. And again, all of those different things, if you're experiencing stress, if you haven't had the opportunity to keep pace with technology, if learning new things is a challenge for you for all sorts of different structural and personal reasons, then that is going to impact not only on your use in that moment, but actually your confidence and your trust. And bear in mind, we all live in a world as well where we know, you know, we've experienced or know about frauds and scams, and that's another thing that actually plays into, you know, creating a sense of anxiety and concern as well.
You were talking about, you know, you talked about food banks, you talked about other institutions that are now having people ask for more support when it comes to getting digital access. And there's also this additional aspect of older Londoners, for example, who really rely on that added support, particularly from libraries, for example. But yet we're seeing a lot of cuts now to those particular, you know, types of institutions like libraries that provide that free support and access to the internet, for example. Are you finding that there are certain demographics that are really being impacted by these types of cuts to things like library closures and other, and you know, even we're seeing less and less institutions really providing that free support?
I think yes. Certainly, we talk a lot about the importance of investing in hyperlocal and community infrastructure. So alongside you'll have had a panel earlier this morning talking about more about the hard infrastructure, but there's that soft infrastructure of the support that is just as vital to enable people then to benefit from any improvements in that hard infrastructure of mobile and broadband. And the story is one of pressure on local authorities, which therefore also puts pressure in terms of library services. There is a story of reduced hours for library services, and also reliance for volunteers. It's difficult to be able to get the resource and to keep the resource and to, to think about investing in upskilling and training. That's important. It's important for library staff and volunteers as well in an age of AI when a lot is changing. And when we've done research with Libraries Connected, one of the things that library branches and library service have commented on is they feel increasingly like they are the front line of councils. They are the kind of go-to when maybe other resources are no longer available and the helpline might be harder to contact. I think it's really important that it isn't only about library services. So they're important and they're universal in there, but actually what we see in the best library services are the ones that are creating space within that library for also other community organisations and groups to come in, and/or they're part of an ecosystem which is also seeing different sorts of touch points. Because there's a really important thing here that we're all talking about how essential digital inclusion, digital access and skills is. But actually, if you're a member of the public, and you might be struggling with this, it's hard to know where to go. And actually, you're not necessarily motivated to go, right, this morning I want to find out how I improve my digital skills or my digital literacy. So it's about, and this is something that we built into the Get Online London model, which I'll be really happy to say more about. But that's very much about enabling different local trusted touch points. So libraries being one example, but not the only example, of local places where there's trust, it's a welcome environment. And if you've got the people in those organisations feeling confident and capable to be able to provide support with digital inclusion, if they're part of the Get Online London network, they might also be drawing on resources like the National Data Bank and the National Device Bank, able to meet some of those needs around access as well as skills and confidence. It's that vision of better interconnected community infrastructure that really is at the heart of the Get Online London programme, which we're delivering with Lottie, with GLA, with the Mayor.
You were talking earlier about the impact that it has on families. That the mobile phone, for example, is so needed, and particularly for families during the pandemic. We learned a lot about the impact that it was having on families there, where there were children who were dependent on looking at a phone to get their homework and get access to the lessons that they needed. What kind of learning have we got from that experience, and how have we moved on from there? And how are we have things improved at all? Have we learned anything from that experience?
I think that's such an important question. And I'm going to... So I think I mentioned earlier, and I'd love to send you a link to the Minimum Digital Living Standard research, because that was looking at households with children. And I think that is important because we are absolutely now in circumstances where internet access and skills and confidence is essential. I think taking a household view means that it isn't only about thinking about children's education, it's actually also about their social participation. And there is always a risk that as government we might think, education good, gaming not interested, but actually, gaming, I'm looking at the young people out in the public gallery, there is so much about internet access that is beyond education and employment, that is actually about culture, participation in society, that feels really important. And for you, also thinking about civic engagement as well, and what this means for democracy, what this means for the channels that you are relying on to communicate with citizens across London and to hear their views. So I think in terms of the learning, the risk still is, I believe, that we see it as essential. We felt it as an emergency during the pandemic because it was so stark. But one of the things that we haven't done is really thought about, in a way, how digital access and confidence at a household level and an individual level almost has become quite a significant variable in terms of the capabilities of an individual or household to be able to access a lot of different opportunities. The data around this, we still rely heavily on a lot of proxy indicators. And that's because the question of that's because when you're collecting data around, say, educational attainment, if you're looking at, surveys of residents, if you're thinking about health outcomes, all of the data in those key national data sets and in kind of London data sets does not have a question that enables you to analyse that data confidently with regard to an individual or household's level of digital access or skills and confidence. And we're currently working in a collaboration with Ofcom, Lloyd's Consumer Digital Index, University of Liverpool and others. We've been engaging with the Local Government Association, engaging also with the Digital Inclusion Unit at DCIT, because we think until we can get a question like that being routinely used, we will not then, in 2 years, 5 years or 10 years, be able to track and tell the extent to which digital barriers have directly impacted on people's health outcomes, on people's educational outcomes. So the learning is, I think no one would dispute the fact that if a household doesn't have sufficient data connectivity and sufficient devices and learning devices for their children to be able to engage in school, and the knowledge and confidence for parents to be able to use things like online payment systems or be able to access free school meal vouchers or holiday, scheme vouchers, we can all understand that the outcomes for those children are likely to be worse than the outcomes in a different household which doesn't face those barriers. However, no data is being collected that will quantify that and give us that clear picture. So I think there is an opportunity here, kind of in amongst everything else that we can do practically, how we can work together just to improve that routine data collection, because otherwise we are going to keep being asked the question, how many people are affected by this? And we're going to keep talking about proxies and, drawing out stories and it will chime with you, it will resonate with you because of what we've learned, but you won't actually be able to get the data you need in order to use that to say we need to allocate more resource in order to be able to monitor whether you're being effective in shifting the dial.
Thank you so much. I think you've covered a vast amount there, and the correlation of not having digital access to health inequalities as well, I think is such a big area, and I think such an interesting perspective in terms of the fact that we still need to do a lot of research and a lot of data gathering. But it looks like the picture does look like that there is that correlation there, and that all needs to be done.
There is no doubt at all that the correlation is very strong. So, I can send over links to evidence around kind of correlations in terms of protected characteristics and what that means, and inclusion health, and where that is likely to intersect with digital exclusion. But it's all about correlations.
And also that social aspect, like
Exactly.
you can be lonely, you can have lack of kind of being able to interact with people in groups and support groups just because of that lack of digital access.
Exactly. And I think the other thing that this connects with, which actually you've also hit the nail on your head in terms of going, this relates to health inequalities. There is something here about the strategy join-up between Get Online London and the Mayor's agenda for digital inclusion in London and the work of, London boroughs and the Greater London Authority, and how that then connects to agendas around economic participation, economic activity, around education, around health inequalities and healthy lives, around housing. I think that there is still the risk that digital inclusion is addressed in a silo. And there are some really great examples. For example, yesterday I was in an online conversation with people from Greenwich and also from Lewisham, where the focus was around temporary accommodation, but also I know from Greenwich that Greenwich are thinking about how their digital inclusion work is integrated as part of their anti-poverty strategy. Those are the sorts of connections that we need to be making here.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to extend a retrospective welcome to the school council from Calverton Primary School in the London Borough of Newham, who were here just for a few minutes and were in the public gallery. And for those few minutes, it was an absolute pleasure to have them. Assembly Member Polanski.
Thank you, Chair. Emma, this is great. I felt like the market was kind of centred in the last conversation. It's nice to centre people and now. I've been doing a lot of work, and this committee has actually been doing an investigation into care experience young people. I was just wondering if you had any data or any kind of further reflections on how these inequalities are exacerbated by being care experienced.
I'm so glad you're doing that. And I can, there are a few links that might be helpful to send you from work that, from some research that's happened, drawing out some of those issues. So, I think care experience young people, again, a lot of this is, you've got the connection with poverty, the connection with housing circumstance, the connection with educational attainment as well. And so all of those different factors coming together create additional risks for care experienced young people in terms of digital access, but also skills and confidence. And when I talk about skills and confidence, as I say, I'm talking not only about the practical tools, but also then the critical thinking and some of those, how do you protect yourself, keep yourself and others safe online, thinking about how you evaluate the information that's coming to you. Now, these are issues that affect all of us, but I suppose it links to the additional disadvantages that care experienced young people might have that might create higher barriers for them, and also their circumstances, meaning that the importance of them being able to have those skills actually for their experience in the moment, and also being able to access future opportunities makes that even more important. I think it raises a really good question around responsibility. And I'm thinking about what is the responsibility of the corporate parent, of the corporate guardian, in terms of ensuring access and in terms of empowering and enabling care experienced young people to be able to develop that understanding and the skills that they need for their lives and for their futures. There are barriers as well to then work, being able to access certain forms of support, especially for those who are under 18 but living independently, for example. And that might link to then the terms and conditions and the requirements that are age related in terms of being able to enter maybe certain contracts around broadband or mobile, and even actually one of the things that we provide through Get Online London is access to the National Data Bank, and it's thanks to, we've got Virgin Media 2, O2, Vodafone and 3 all donating free mobile data, which can then be distributed out. The terms and conditions of that are 18 plus, so we're unable to make that available to under 18 young people in the care system or who are living independently but who could need it. So I just mentioned that in terms of one way around that might be through corporate parent responsibilities and taking that on, because that's effectively what happens in other households. So I'm really glad you asked that question, because I do think there is much more that could be done there, and it is part of parenting today, is supporting your children and helping them to access and navigate the online world in a way that's good for their well-being as well.
Absolutely. Do you know the reason why the companies are saying that it has to be 18 plus? I don't expect it.
So I think it will be important. So I can find out and feed that back, but effectively this is about terms and conditions, and it's also about safeguarding. So Good Things Foundation as well, our focus is around supporting adults. And so we don't work directly, for example, with schools. It's more community organisations. So therefore, we know that data from the National Data Bank will be benefiting children. The data itself is going to the adult in the household, if you see what I mean.
Yes.
So I think it's... But I do think it's still the question of, in terms of care experienced young people, though, what then is the responsibility of the corporate parent in that sense? Yeah.
Makes total sense. Just a final question. It's about our kind of reliance on technology. So a couple of weeks ago, I had the personal experience of dropping my phone in the river, which the chair knows about. Now, I'm not suggesting we legislate for fools who drop phones in rivers, but something I noticed very quickly was being able to have another phone. I happened to have a partner who was able to lend me his phone, but then looking for Wi-Fi to then log back into bank accounts and stuff like that. I had to go into a cafe, buy a cup of tea, use the free Wi-Fi there. But again, if we're looking at these inequalities, these feel like further barriers. Are there more that companies can be doing to make sure that we don't have such reliance on technology? Because it suddenly meant not being able to access one app meant that I couldn't then access other apps, and it just became very difficult.
I think it's always so helpful, isn't it, when you have an experience like that, it does then kind of impact you in terms of thinking about, well, what if you didn't have a partner who was able to? What if you weren't able to afford that cup of coffee, etc.? I'm just going to do a bit of a segue to say this is where we have been... I mean, one of the things that Get Online London does is it tries to address the devices piece and the skills piece, as well as the data connectivity piece. And the Mayor has recently confirmed that 700 devices from City Hall are going to be donated into the London Device Bank, and he's calling on other businesses to do likewise. And I mention that because there is something in the round here of, had you not been able to, how do we make it easier for people who have broken or lost a device and actually desperately need it because they don't have alternatives to be able to get a device, say, through a community organisation or a library. And so far, Get Online London has distributed around 7,000 devices out to people who really need them, benefiting individuals and households. And the idea of the model is about donated end-of-working life devices that can then be securely refurbished and wiped. So you're also contributing to reducing e-waste and net zero. And I just do want to bring that in because some of these solutions are actually within the gift of public sector as well as corporates to be able to contribute to a win-win circular model. I think going back to your question, at the heart of that is it's a recognition that we are all massively reliant on technology. And honestly, I can't see that changing. And actually, this also links to the connectivity point because I can't see our need for data reducing. If I think about AI and generative AI, if I think about kind of video calls, remote working, if I think about the future of public service broadcasting and the BBC and the BBC's kind of ongoing transition towards internet first, maybe internet only, which will raise really interesting questions for what is an essential amount or what is enough when you're in a world where the BBC is predominantly accessed and streaming for entertainment and for news and essential information. So I can't see our reliance on technology or our need for data, or linked to that, our need for devices. So at the moment, there's a free trial happening in Westminster backed by the Mayor called Connected London. It's about free public Wi-Fi. That's brilliant. It's really exciting. But one of the things they've acknowledged is at the moment, it's about scanning a QR code. And that means you need a certain level of kit to be able to scan a QR code. So, and I think that's the other interesting thing, Zach, because a lot of our technologies, some of the innovations that might help, like a Gov wallet that makes it, you know, one portal, or an improved NHS app portal, those technological changes need to be designed to be more inclusive. But actually the challenge is how you design those to be more inclusive and also available on older kit that might not be able to kind of download more, you know, up-to-date software, etc. So I think you've got a number of different challenges that come together, but certainly inclusive design in a way that is designing for 100%, not just kind of 70% of the population or 60% even, is important. But I cannot see our reliance on technology reducing. I should say that Good Things Foundation, we're very much people first. So it's not that we don't say tech is the solution to everything, but actually what we do find is that where people have the kit and the support and the confidence, and where interfaces are really well designed, then it can save money, it can save time, it can open up opportunities. So tech can help us improve our lives and make our lives and interactions better, as long as we've got the kit and the support to be able to benefit.
Absolutely. Just one final very quick follow-up. You're not from a mayor's office, so no need for you to know, but do you know why the free public Wi-Fi is accessible by QR code? It feels like that's an extra barrier.
This is a pilot.
Okay.
And so therefore explicitly within the pilot they're going, we know that, you know, this is a pilot and this isn't ideal because, but you start. And so I think there is, I would also say, I think it's really exciting that this pilot is happening. It will be great to think about improved equity, but also then to think about how what is learnt not only spreads to London, other London boroughs, but also what is the relevance outside London as well. And I think the other element that comes with that is it's helpful in terms of actually making it easier for people to have more of a seamless experience. That's the idea. So rather than having to log on separately if you're in one venue or another, there is a kind of a single login. So that's a really nice piece of kind of improved design in terms of accessibility. But as with anything, it still requires good public information so people know how to do it, and also so people know how to use it securely and confidently, and what they might want to think twice in terms of the risks in using and how they kind of handle their data. So I think public Wi-Fi is important, but it also needs different sorts of support in place so people can use it securely.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Georgiou.
Thank you, Chair. Laura, been sitting there very patiently. To what extent do London's small businesses have access to fast and reliable broadband?
Hi. Firstly, thank you to the committee for having us here and this investigation to gather evidence as well. It's always a pleasure to be here. When it comes to access to broadband connectivity, I think the more and more the world is becoming digital, and even more so post-COVID, a lot of SMEs found that they need to be digital. They need to be able to be found by customers. So actually the need for broadband connectivity, and not just ability to connect, but also having affordable and reliable connectivity, is becoming more and more increasingly important. And although obviously with the minimum universal service obligation of 10 megabits per second, we actually find that a lot of SMEs say that they're struggling to even find that. I can confirm that I found the the public Wi-Fi here meeting those standards while we were sitting here. But there are a lot of business owners who struggle with that. And there's a lot of nut spots where business owners are struggling. And even we have cases where business owners say that across the street, they can have a super fast fiber connection, but on their side of the street, they cannot. And even often they find it difficult to find updated information on websites that when could their area or their street actually get a super fast connection. That in the past they used to find that information easily, but these days it's becoming more and more difficult for them to kind of browse different websites to find relevant and reliable information. So a lot of the businesses are still finding ongoing connectivity issues, although general coverage is pretty good, but we also have case studies from people outside of London who've moved to London and have actually been so surprised that they were expecting better connection, that they used to have a better connection living outside of the London area, and they're now struggling or trying to find various ways to become inventive. We even have some case studies where people have a separate landline and a separate contract for just the broadband that costs them a lot more money, but that's the way they found a solution. And what I also found, because I was preparing for today, obviously looking into the feedback from our members, whether it was, we did an in-depth study just before COVID as well, but also we gathered information directly from members. So I have a couple of feedback notes as well, if you don't mind. But I even looked at my own broadband connection, the level of it, also the contract, what was initially promised. And a lot of members find that the contract doesn't actually live up to the upload and download speeds. And then it becomes more and more difficult. And there are certain times of the day where you might kind of have higher or lower speeds connection. And I even find myself that on the days that I do work from home, I actually turn off wireless on my phone just to make sure that certain times of the day my own personal connection is good enough. So I'm also personally in the process of chasing up my suppliers to make sure that what's promised is also delivered. And one of the other things is the fact that there is a disparity in service quality. And for a small business owner, you're already dealing with a lot of bureaucracy and running your business, and then having to chase up like how fast is your internet speed and is it reliable? And the fact that the loss in actually connection often leads to losing customers. It leads to disruption to your teams. A lot of SMEs, the more and more they use online and cloud-based services, the more they actually rely on really good, reliable broadband as well. Some of the other things, business disruption. SMEs are just really struggling these days with most things, and then it can cause a lot of disruption. And those working from home, whether it's part-time, full-time, or startups, they really need really good access. And often enough, when you choose your location, it's not the first thing on your mind that let me check the broadband connectivity, reliability, and speed first. You usually end up doing that once you've moved. And then you can find yourself in a quite difficult situation. One thing that comes up quite a bit as well, and we've advocated for this previously, is the fact that when it's your own personal broadband contract, you can get compensation when it doesn't live up to the mark. But when it comes to a business contract, there's no obligation for the service provider to actually give you any type of compensation. So that is a big thing that I would actually highlight and kind of ask for, to be able to kind of advocate for that a bit more as well. And the demand is only increasing. I hope
Thank you. No, that was,
answers.
No, you killed off about two-thirds of my questions. Yeah,
can I just quickly share a couple of feedbacks as well? Would that be...
If they're brief.
Yes. And this is one of the ones that I kind of mentioned. Having moved from Milton Keynes with excellent broadband, I find my current connectivity quite poor. My business is in UM, and I can only connect using copper, although I understand that transition to fibre is planned. I cannot speak for more established London businesses, but I was expecting more from the capital. and another one as well. I will only keep it to two. London has pretty good broadband coverage, but reliability can still be an issue in some areas. Outages and slow speed can be frustrating, especially for businesses and remote workers.
Thank you, Laura. So, effectively, in answering my question, as I say, comprehensive is very good. It's a very good response. So, effectively, in summary, it's very patchy across London. Right.
It can be, and I think the businesses who've not had to struggle with this don't have the same issue, but those who do are just finding it really frustrating because you lose so much time, and obviously you can't deliver the service as well as some other provider, and this is where you can really lose customers. You could be really great at what you do, but if your broadband doesn't allow you to deliver the service at your own capability, then it's a major issue. And even previously, so many businesses are looking like if they can upgrade to full fiber, most of them would do it. Even pre-COVID, most of them already saw the need to make sure that they can deliver the services. Pre-COVID, already 32% of SMEs that we inquired said that this prevented them from contracting or being contacted by customers. Most of them also still said that it's a barrier to growth for the business as well. They have lost business. Over 26% said that they've lost business because of bad connectivity. And a lot of them report the unreliability of good service, especially more and more these days when it comes to Zoom calls or team calls. Poor connection really hinders growth.
Well, I mean, especially with contactless payments, things like that. I mean, that,
yes,
you know,
and it's various types of businesses. Yes, a lot of them could be cloud-based consulting services, digital services, etc. But some of them are just small business owners. Whether it's selling cupcakes, you still need to take payment. And I see it often myself when I go and pay somewhere, and then how ashamed they feel trying to run around a store, trying to find connection. Or if it's not working at all, it's lost business for them. Or the fact that they greet customers sometimes, even if it's a salon, saying that, oh, do you have cash on you? Because we can only charge cash today because the service isn't working. And I come across this quite a bit, actually.
No, I empathise. I can't remember the last time I carried cash with me, but you know, I think that's generally for particular set Londoners, that's the case. It tends to be contactless. So thank you. And I'm surprised that as many as 26% have said that suffering a business is not good. So you've already answered, you know, how does slow and unreliable broadband affect London's businesses in your first answer. You covered that quite well. So are there any particular types of businesses that are particularly impact? You know, I mean, there's certain sectors that the FSB, as their members, you guys represent, that say, you know, yeah, these outages or slow or no broadband or no fibre optic, this is really hitting our bottom line. Are there particular sectors?
To be fair, when it comes to SMEs, all of them are affected if they are in those areas. Right. I think more so the ones that rely on that connectivity literally on a minute-to-minute basis, whether they offer IT support, whether they are those consulting-based businesses, and they heavily rely on the cloud and being able to access that information, whether it's in their home office, in the main office, or even on the go often enough, they heavily rely on that. So it just is more down to the area you're currently in and the speed and reliability of that service.
Okay, that's extremely helpful. Thank you very much. I'll hand back to you, Chair.
Thank you. And Laura, if you have any other feedback as well, please could you pass it to Tim, because that helps with our outcomes afterwards. Thank you. Assembly Member James Small-Edwards.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon. Laura, what would you say are the main barriers to those small businesses you've mentioned securing access to fast and reliable broadband?
Well, a lot of it is those infrastructure gaps, because although that super fast fibre is rolling out, the initial deadline for the full coverage was 2025, and that's been pushed to 2030. So those gaps still remain. So those nut spots are crucial. And Also, one of the things is the wayleave issue, getting landlords on board so they allow access for buildings to have those connections. But also one of the other things is new builds, making sure that it's actually, that they have a requirement that when they're built, that they should allow, that it should be crucial for them to incorporate that they don't get planning unless they are built to a standard that allows super fast connection. And cost for even SMEs, cost is also a barrier because we've asked for a minimum cost for them 10 megabits to be around £35, hopefully for small business owners, because as I say, some of the case studies that I've heard, and yes, it could be very individual case studies, for someone to pay 2 different contracts can cost them hundreds of pounds. And currently for SMEs, they're already so heavily tax burdened, so cost can be an issue. And then the fact that even if you're tied to a contract and it doesn't live up to the standards, it's very difficult often to break that contract so you can find a better supplier. So those are some of the bigger barriers at the moment as well. So yeah, I'd say rollout is one of the top ones, and then affordability.
Yeah, and that's really interesting what you said about wayleaves as well, because I asked a question in the previous session about landlords and access, and there was a suggestion that that wasn't a massive issue, but obviously, according to the small businesses that your members are representing of, that is a bit of a problem. So yeah, thank you very much. And just to finish, to you both, what more do you think the Mayor can do to ensure that all of London's residents and businesses have access to fast and reliable broadband?
Sustain Get Online London. So we are working with the GLA to explore extension funding for that, but it is a lifeline, and it's already been impactful. Over 125,000 Londoners reached through this. I mentioned earlier City Hall and device donation, which actually I think will be relevant in terms of looking across the board, making that business as usual, not a one-off, seeing it as part of sustainability and reducing e-waste, as well as tackling digital exclusion. I mentioned already the Connected London scheme, which I'm really interested in, and I said sharing that London, accelerating that, and trying to find ways to ensure equity and that it really can be used safely and securely by Londoners, that they know how to use it. The joining up strategically. So this doesn't exist in a silo. It is about small businesses, it's about economy, education, health inequalities. And I think that is a really important strategic message in terms of place shaping for London across the board. And I think finally, connect with us and think about how we can improve data collection by asking a question that helps us understand how digital access and skills is and isn't impacting on outcomes in key areas of people's lives and business, into the future. We need to start collecting better data on this.
What we would ask for would be focus on eradicating those broadband nutspots across the capital to ensure every small business, including startups and those working from home and self-employed, have access to digital resources and great, reliable broadband services. Ensuring that new build properties, including commercial properties, are super fast fibre broadband enabled as part of the planning conditions. That would be a way to deal with the wayleave. Making sure that business broadband is affordable, but also that those service providers are kept accountable for delivering those services, and to extend the compensation scheme also to those business contracts, not just private residential contracts. We would also like the minimum universal service obligation to be updated to 25 megabits download speed instead of the 10 that currently exists, because businesses becoming more and more digitally reliant need faster broadband service. So the 10 minimum often does not cover kind of the minimum requirements. And broadband providers should make it easier and also cheaper for businesses to leave their service if they don't live up to the mark. And information should be more easily available to also cover similar terms used by broadband providers that explain in a simple way the level of service that they are offering, because often with different service providers, they use fancy words to kind of say that they're delivering something more than they actually are. So something to call broadband service providers out on that and just ask them to simplify it or use unified language as well. So thank you again for having us here, to listening, and for the work that you do. And if there's anything else that we can provide, and I can send you some more of those specific feedbacks. They're quite short, but from people that share the individual stories as well and what they found. And that could be very insightful, because I found it very personal and it touched me a lot. And as I say, I'm looking into my own broadband service providers as well to truly experience and understand everyone's perspectives. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we'll agree those personal experiences are really helpful. Thank you very much for your responses, and back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much. So we've now reached the end of our panel question and answers. Thank you both so much for coming and just the insight that you've given. One of the takeaways that I have from both our panel this morning and from yourselves is about this assumption that London doesn't have a problem, and quite clearly there are areas that do need some work, and hopefully our investigation has shone a spotlight on that issue. I wonder if you would stay for a few minutes just to have our photo for the final committee this year. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? Can we also delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from our discussion today? The next meeting of the committee will be confirmed at the London Assembly's annual meeting in May 2025, during which the Assembly will establish the committees for the 25-26 Assembly year, as well as the timetable for their respective meetings. I have no urgent business, but before I conclude today's meeting, this is the end of my tenure as chair for the last 2 years of the Economy and now named Economy, Culture and Skills Committee. I wanted to just say thank you to people. I want to thank Sal, who is our brilliant committee clerk, who absolutely keeps me in order, to our fantastic scrutiny team, without who the briefings, the questions and the outputs in terms of reports and letters wouldn't happen. So thank you both, Tim and Morris. To our GLA media team and Tony Smythe, who is up there, and the work that you do around publicising everything that we do from this committee. And a group of people who I don't think actually get enough credit, but I would like to acknowledge them, and those are the group researchers, who I think do a fantastic job and enable the extra questions that we have. To our tech team that make the chamber work, and can we acknowledge, and you can cheer if you want, that it is not -5 in this room today. And of course to our wonderful panellists and guests who enable us to have the investigations that we have, who we are utterly grateful to, because they give up their time and come and give us, their insight into issues which we very gratefully receive. And of course, to all of you as committee members, who on the whole have remained incredibly well behaved in the 2 years that I've been chair. And with that, I conclude our business for the day. Thank you.
This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.